Hello, Ivy here. This week's podcast is entitled The Psychology of Resentment. We did a podcast a couple of years ago on a similar topic, and this is really moving on, building on that previous podcast, linking in current events. Hopefully you will find it informative and interesting. Episode 120. The meaning of resentment. Resentment is a natural reaction to unfair or difficult events and to the action of others. It consists of various experiences, most often of pain and anger, and feelings of guilt, shame, or fear can be mixed with them. If someone declares that they do not know how to be offended, this means one of two things. Either it is not true, or the person does not have a close relationship with anyone. People are not offended by strangers. Resentment appears in meaningful relationships. Some key points to remember as we go through this podcast. The words people use for emotions influence the ways they think about emotions. The word resentment has negative connotations that can make legitimate anger seem unreasonable. Calling anger resentment turns potential social failings to individual ones. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines this complex emotion as a feeling of indignant displeasure or persistent ill will at something regarded as a wrong, insult, or injury. Etymologically, resent has come to English from French and originally from Latin, composed of the prefix re plus sentire, to feel. Some etymological dictionaries interpret the re part of it as an intensifying prefix, but re literally means again. People who feel resentment experience an insult again and again and again for years, sometimes for decades. Few English words for emotions carry such negative connotations. The anatomy of resentment. Resentment is a strange, complex emotion. It can sneak upon you and then linger and gnaw, but some constantly, forever, becoming the stuff of the unforgivable, unforgettable grudge. Other times it comes in waves, triggered by stress, perhaps, or someone's similar misdeed. It flares up, then dies down. It is driven by imbalance. If you do what you want to do, because you want to do it, you don't feel resentful. Resentment comes when this equation falls apart. Why resentment can be dangerous. The feeling of resentment is one of the most difficult to understand and painful to experience, and there is no person who would not experience it at least once. Kids and adults, friends and lovers, children and parents are offended. Let's find out what kind of feeling it is, how it arises, and how it affects health, and most importantly, how to cope with your resentment and what to do if you offended another. Can resentment cause stress? Like any difficult emotion, research shows that holding on to resentment can cause stress in the body. A 2018 study that appeared in Health Psychology found that adults who held on to anger and hostility over the course of a decade experienced greater cognitive decline than those who were more apt to forgive. What do resentful people hide? Resentful people are always holding on to the things that hurt them, like burning pieces of wood they can't seem to let go of. They do this to be able to throw those things back at the people who hurt them anytime they please. The funny thing is that by doing this, they only end up hurting themselves. There's nothing positive about holding on to that burning hatred and anger for so long. As we go through this, and also in more detail in the article, and some of the slides you'll see on the video podcast, I'd like you to think of various members of groups that we have mentioned in previous podcasts over the last 3 years. Think of members of the royal family. Think of the media, televised and printed, and the characters that we all know and I don't need to name. Think of the keyboard warriors, particularly some of the more famous ones. But focus on, I would say, of those groups, the British royal family and the media, and then the impact that they have on keyboard warriors and any other group that wishes to take things further. So when we are talking about resentment and what it means and how it can manifest itself, and also the damage it can do to the host, I think certain names will come to the top of the thought processes where you can sit and listen and watch them in action and say, yeah, resentment is there, and the signs of the damage internally is becoming more and more evident as time goes by. So I'll leave it at that. I'll put no names to any of those, but I am absolutely sure that you will have people that you can identify immediately and say, yes, they're exhibiting those things. Most of us know a resentful person. However, there's one thing we must always keep in mind. More often than not, we think that those who experience this deep and self-destructive feeling are people who didn't learn to forgive others. But this is actually a very complex subject that has many different nuances. It doesn't really matter what people say about this feeling. The truth is that it's quite universal and recurrent, and that no one is exempt from feeling it. A person who experienced traumatizing events such as abandonment or betrayal is very prone to feeling resentment. Characteristics and psychological profile of resentful people, which includes an inability to forgive. We all know that forgiving isn't the easiest thing to do. However, we must keep in mind that it's an important thing to do if we want to get closure and move on with our lives. Resentful people don't want to forgive anyone. All they do is feed their pain by replaying the triggering event over and over. By doing this, their feelings of despair and anguish intensify. In fact, the University of Pisa carried out a study that was published in the Frontiers in Human Neuroscience magazine. By the way, all these are listed in the reference sources, that revealed that while feeding resentment deepens the emotional wound, forgiving regulates a great number of neuronal structures, reduces stress, and activates areas in the prefrontal cortex related to problem solving. Immense pride is another area. Pride is a battle horse that invades and annihilates everything. Resentful people are always on the defensive. They'll always find a way to get upset at you, no matter what you do. Even the smallest things make them feel bad about themselves. Thus, it's not easy to coexist, have a conversation, or reach an agreement with a proud person, because you know that, at the end of the day, they'll take everything personally. An inability to tend to emotional and psychological needs. We all get hurt sometimes. Having negative feelings about the person that hurt us isn't frowned upon. It's actually quite the opposite. We kind of have the right to. However, being permanently angry at them and not being able to detach ourselves from the event and the pain is not psychologically normal. Feeling like this on a daily basis will only cause bitterness. We must digest the things that happen to us and move on. Now, moving on doesn't necessarily mean forgiving everything. It means making use of psychological strategies to deal with our wounds and open ourselves up to new opportunities. Those who don't give themselves the chance to escape from their frustrations will live a life full of grudges and spite. Dichotomous thinking. You're either with me or against me. Things are either black or white. You either help me or you're betraying me. This way of thinking automatically causes cognitive distortion. The worst part is that resentful people don't even realise they think this way, since it becomes so natural for them. Going to extremes is their way of handling everything. They tend to push everyone away because of this. How to keep resentment from controlling us. A behavioural psychology article talked about an interesting study on this topic that was conducted in Ontario, Canada. In this study, the researchers discussed the importance of giving resentful people appropriate psychological tools that would allow them to welcome emotional forgiveness into their lives. There is a very simple reason why this is such an important exercise. Basically, it allows us to get rid of our negative emotions in order to create a new psychological reality. Last in this section, but not least, resentful people must learn to start focusing on the present instead of the past. Thinking only about past experiences keeps them from living a free life. To fight this, they should focus on starting new projects and relationships. Resentment in a family business setting. Family-owned businesses can be rewarding, but they also come with their own unique set of challenges. One common issue is conflict, which can arise due to a variety of factors. As we presented in a previous article in this series, drivers of conflict in family-owned businesses. Conflict in a family business has many root causes. These include, but are not limited to, lack of clear roles and responsibilities, lack of planning, leadership succession and/or ownership transition, differing values, goals and family vision, differences in work ethic, power struggles, treating family members differently than employees, lack of family governance structure, jealousy and favouritism, lack of approach to address family conflict, and greed. If not properly addressed, conflict can lead to tension, misunderstandings, and even the breakdown of relationships within the family and the business. When it comes to family businesses, consider the words of author Max Lucado. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. We can say that resentment is a bottomless pit where no one deserves to live. We should take advantage of the escape routes that life offers us. There are plenty of paths that lead to freedom, happiness, tranquility, and dignity. This next section is an extract from a previous SG UK podcast from 2022, which we looked at resentment in terms of individuals, groups, and families, and the links to hate activity. We always come back to the groups at the top of UK society. For example, government, monarchy, aristocracy, UK media, including royal reporters, and the police. All of them are slow to react to hate speech or incitement of hateful behaviour, often because they use the same words, or take part in some of the activity, and it is deemed acceptable, as they know the other pillars at the top of the UK societal structure will not challenge it. All scratch the back of each other. My views, and I stand by them, when those groups allow a couple to be put at risk in terms of health and safety, and a growing number of tangible death threats, along with the keyboard warriors who openly post death threats on various forums, then I strongly believe that international legal bodies need to step in. If they don't or can't, what is the use of any United Nations international forum? Do you remember when the royal family, through its mouthpieces, the Royal Rota, tried to describe life outside of the royal bubble as if it was like swimming in shark-infested waters? Life would be one without state banquets and wearing tiaras and gowns, and people would curtsy to you, or vice versa, dependent upon the class system that exists in royal life, but nowhere else. A life of pretend, playing statesman or woman, and have people bow and scrape to you to boost your ego. No child is prepared for a life outside, earning their own coins. The royal plantation has just grown and grown on the backs of the UK people. A number of groups have grown out of that system, and now the system needs to be protected to preserve the way of life of a few. Hence the collective approach to stamping out any individual or group set up to bring about change and accountability, and for the public to have a say on whether or not a monarchy is viable in a modern society. The treatment of Harry and Meghan has provided evidence and learning points for the future. The Sussexes have made a new home for themselves in the USA, and they are pursuing their humanitarian projects on a global stage. No longer do they have to dim their lights in an effort to make the others look good. Whilst the royal family and pals in their various groups are spending more time trying to save their position in the monarchy from collapse than do anything tangible to help the UK and its growing poverty within its population, the Sussexes are mixing with global leaders, formulating real projects on the ground to help people. Harry and Meghan represent modern monarchy, even though they have been stripped of all the things that appear to people living within that royal bubble. The Sussexes have proved titles and tiaras do not make the world sit up. And take notice, now the UK is starting to see self-inflicted damage that they did to themselves whilst Harry and Meghan are flying high. The plan to seek and destroy has backfired on a global stage, and it is the British royal family's own acts of propaganda activity that has had a ripple effect of damaging the credibility of the royal family with each passing act of vindictiveness. Meanwhile, the Sussexes are thriving and creating a wonderful legacy for their children, and a growing list of organisations and people who have felt the impact of the kindness and generosity of the Artwell Foundation. The moral of this story, and one which I will end the podcast on, is to say that despite years of propaganda campaign being in place, and the people who have come on board with its messages, increasing numbers of people are now beginning to question the purpose of the campaign and its duration. The world has major issues that need tackling, and to see a family and its powerful friends pursue a woman of colour and to put her and her children at risk because she was not a Stepford clone like all the other females in that family who are left alone is damaging to sensible people. The UK has lost a very valuable member of that family because he supports his wife 100%, and no doubt feels deeply ashamed of the racism that is completely evident by his family, despite it being wrapped up in other descriptions as part of the propaganda campaign. Media hosts were making public statements daily for Meghan to leave the UK and go back to the USA. The media spoke and wrote articles about the acting industry and Hollywood in particular in a very disparaging way, referred to black billionaires in similar terms, and showed no knowledge and did no research, and were so unprofessional in their rhetoric. Yet now members of the British royal family plan to visit and have visited places that they have spent the last 5 or so years describing negatively, using such words as ghetto, and referring to all wealthy black people in disparaging terms, and even worse for those who work in the medium of television. Well, now Meghan and Harry have left the UK and are still standing and doing very well indeed. The same cannot be said for the royal family or the UK. Who's sorry now? Resentment is a complex, multi-layered emotion that has been described as a mixture of disappointment, disgust, anger, and fear. Inherent in resentment is a perception of unfairness. It has become known for anger, spite, and holding a grudge. Resentments can also develop and be maintained by focusing on past grievances continuously, or by trying to justify the emotions. Resentment can occur as a result of the grief process and can be sustained by ruminating over it. Stephen Stosny makes an analogy distinguishing the functions of anger and resentment, as anger being like a fire extinguisher meant to put out and prevent immediately harmful situations from becoming more harmful, while resentment is more like a smoke alarm, something that is always on and requires energy and emotions to sustain this alarm system, and is meant to protect us if, just in case, something or someone harmful from past experience shows up. Anger is about the immediate situation, whereas resentment is a defensive way to mentally punish, or, in the more extreme case, to devalue. I hope some of the statements about what resentment is and how it can manifest is allowing you and enabling you to make links with various situations that we have all seen and read about and have discussed in great detail in our one-to-ones and groups and friends and so on. And I hope you can make those links now, or when you're reading the article and you've got it in front of you, because I certainly found that as I go through my notes, when I look at certain phrases, certain sections, immediately I can bring to the fore an example of where that has played out, in my opinion, whether that be an individual or a concerted effort by a group, or a symbiotic relationship between two groups, and so on. So I'm sort of giving you all of these, but it's for you to think about whether or not any of those examples and ways of the resentment appearing and how people behave, whether it immediately then brings to mind some of the situations. And when you do it like that, and you look at how many examples I'm giving, therefore how many examples, 2 and 3 times each for any one of those descriptions, and we have got plenty more in terms of evidence base. There's a lot. To repeat an example of resentment behaviour, which we mentioned earlier in the podcast, is as follows. Resentful people are always holding on to the things that hurt them, like a burning piece of wood that they can't seem to let go of. They do this to be able to throw those things back at the people who hurt them anytime they please. The funny thing is that by doing this, they only end up hurting themselves. There's nothing positive about holding on to that burning hatred and anger for so long. Some members of the royal family should be reminded of that fact, because they will never recognise this self-harm they are doing to themselves. The aim of propaganda is to influence people's opinions or behaviour actively, rather than merely to communicate the facts about something. There was a time that the British royal family wanted to ship Harry and Meghan off to any country other than the UK. The first choice was Africa, because the person who was the driving force behind this nonsense believed that Africa was a country, and more than that, as it was a continent that Harry referred to with love and affection, it suited the family concerned to dump the Sussexes in a black nation where they would be happy, etc. Apart from the sheer audacity of the plan, in what way could this have worked? Did they believe that no African nation would expect to make that decision for themselves rather than be told by the UK? The Sussex's light will always be brighter than the rest of the family because of the British royal family's refusal to read the room and move forward accordingly. The Sussexes are now on another continent, and their light is shining even brighter. Royal reporters always reported that the heirs should shine the brightest, and they should have the limelight, not someone way down the pecking order. Well, the propaganda did not quite work out as the UK establishment planned. Yes, the UK has created a hostile environment for the Sussexes, in the same way that it has for all people of colour who wish to live in the UK. In fact, the most recent examples is the difference in response to white refugees and all the others who are people of colour. Well, the royal family have the spotlight they craved for, and they have been found wanting. Almost 8 years since Meghan was announced as being Harry's girlfriend, and we still have one relative hell-bent on destroying this marriage, in the mistaken belief that Harry will return and be his whipping boy again. Have you all noticed that there has not been one project completed since Harry left Shutter Island? Not one. A few given high publicity by its propaganda team as making progress or about to start, but we have yet to see one tangible, measurable outcome that has made a difference to anyone. The resentment from the family for being exposed as not really doing anything measurable and meaningful in terms of output, and yet are still doing the smile and wave approach on their visits. Just this week, the next in line to the throne claims he wishes to do more than cutting ribbons and smiling. Two things in response to that description, which has been quoted in UK media this week. 1. The heir is admitting that all they actually do is, or certainly in the main, is cut ribbons, etc., and is quite damning coming from his current position. Most people know and recognise that it is no more than that, and anything else away from our view is not of benefit to the UK, and the activity is never detailed in any public records, and it most certainly is not measurable in any form of output that has ever appeared in public records. This should be of major concern to the institution and the other societal groups mentioned, but it is never discussed publicly, and if there is any form of inquiry into certain aspects of such secretive activity, the facts disappear into a black hole of nothing to see here trash bin. The effort put into maintaining the status quo and the industry that has been created to destroy a couple who wanted to do things slightly differently has not gone unnoticed, and will one day be very high profile in the public consciousness. In the end, the couple were chased out of the country, and now the same groups of abusers have found that the firm is not faring so well, and it is not a temporary situation. None of the firm has put anything like the effort into looking at the state of the UK today and explored how the firm and its establishment groups could help. But the resources put towards trying to tear down a couple who are having a global impact with their work are seen as the enemy that must be destroyed. The USA is not a Commonwealth nation, and since the Sussexes now reside there and are doing well, we have had taxpayer funds going towards vanity projects which just so happen to take place in the USA, near to where the Sussexes live. Yeah, right. What a coincidence. There is zero reason for the individual who is constantly incandescent with rage to be there, and that description is quoted in their UK media, who they work closely with most weeks. The latest official line of rhetoric is that the next in line has torn himself away from his sick wife's side to come out almost daily with a series of cameo appearances, each of which is trying to give the impression that he has now become a diplomat and that he can say the right phrases and be dropped into various places around the world of his choosing so far and solve issues that experienced individuals have been working on for years and are still working on. It gives the impression of a reality show where they fly people out and drop them from helicopters into various situations, and somehow they will solve so many issues in a few hours and then board the helicopter again and fly to the next crisis that needs a royal avenger. It is not a smile and wave situation, and it is an insult to highly qualified and experienced personnel out there on the front lines of many areas of suffering to have someone fly in with zero competence in the subject matter. It is an affront to decency and patronising to those who are suffering. All of this performative activity is based on resentment towards Meghan and Harry, who are out there working with partner organisations along with separate projects of their own, and they are very successful. They have the respect of their peers who are following similar philanthropic paths, along with venture projects. Resentment eating away at members of the British royal family, which has resulted in the implosion we have been witnessing since 2020. For an institution that wanted the Sussexes to disappear, they do seem to be going to great lengths to be in the dust clouds of the Sussexes, in the hope that they will be seen as popular too. Too many people in the UK are living in impoverished lives and conditions, and yet appear to have no problem with their figurehead family parading around pretending to be diplomats or project managers or successful business people. The people who should feel resentment are the UK population. No doubt it will be soon time again to bring out a black friend for the cameras from their posse in the media. It is time for the monarchy to focus on the country that they represent in some shape or form, and then look to people in need elsewhere, and not use the colour of their skin to guide the interventions used. Public funds should not be paying for vanity projects of others who feel annoyed that they are not publicly adored. Spend time as an institution finding ways to make yourselves useful to the country, if you wish to remain as a monarchy, because at the moment it is not clear to a growing number of people. The level of hatred created towards the Sussexes, Meghan in particular, falls at the British royal family door. That is known the world over now, so it is going to take more than visits to places where you feel safe to talk about things that are not a priority for those countries, and places where you were not invited in the first place needs a rethink. The increase in risks to the Sussex family has increased due to activity by the groups mentioned above, deliberately baited by UK media groups every day. Your hands are not clean just because you hide them behind your backs after you write the venom daily in the tabloids, interview the same problematic people on the TV, and now have encouraged groups within the population to set up hate groups online. And now the activity is moving into the physical realm. Move the effort put into resentment activity and do something tangible for the UK population reliant on food banks and who cannot afford to heat their homes in the winter. Allow discussions to take place about becoming a republic to commence. At the moment, the public has no opportunity to vote yes or no. Those discussions need and will eventually start to be prominent. One couple leaving the royal family should not lead to this aimless, lacklustre sight we see every day now. One couple leaving should not cause the monarchy to crumble. Seems to me that it was always weak, but you had someone who was good at the job and covered for you all. But when he met his future wife, who was equally accomplished and experienced, the jealousy and the envy began. Very quickly, it turned into resentment. And now we are where we are. The writing is on the wall for all monarchies, but the UK seems hell-bent on being in the front of the activity in Europe. To repeat an example of resentment behaviour, because I think it's just so simple but so very powerful, as it's been mentioned twice in this podcast so far, resentful people are always holding on to the things that hurt them, like burning pieces of wood they can't seem to let go of. They do this to be able to throw those things back at the people who hurt them any time they please. The funny thing is that by doing this, they only end up hurting themselves. There is nothing positive about holding on to that burning hatred and anger for so long. Some members of the royal family should be reminded of that fact, because they will never recognise this self-harm they are doing to themselves at the moment. The British royal family are behaving like crabs in a bucket, and are destroying each other over time. Anyone who wants to become a diplomat should look into that more in the private sector and see how many companies will be eager to snap up any member of the royal family without evidence of competence. The huge risks involved with such activity being performed as a member of the British royal family does not bear thinking about. The ramifications of playing statesmen in various royal engagements has been uncomfortable viewing. And if 1% of that was done with national leaders and dignitaries, it could escalate very quickly into something which could risk lives. This is not a school play. This is real life. Royal life of cutting ribbons and smiling is no longer relevant. Popping up every time the non-taxpayer funded royals have another success somewhere in the world is not a circus act or even credible behaviour for the nation's figurehead family. Made worse by the fact it is nothing but a performance act with no measurables or performance indicators contained in a project plan. It is just promises of jam tomorrow, with no idea where the jam will be produced and transported to the correct destination. It is all just words, not action. The appearances that immediately follow any Sussex success are as predictable as a working clock. Likewise, the content and tone of UK tabloid literature liners relating to Harry and Meghan, but radio silence on anything of worth that the nation should hear about. Any nation that has a newspaper industry that creates news to write about as opposed to reporting on the news represents a nation with a failing economy. That is a known fact. I'll bring this podcast to a close now. I think there is enough information, bullet points, headings, combined with a list of reference sources, which if you wish to pursue and investigate further, all of them will give you good starting points. The article will be up on the website on Monday evening, early evening, hopefully, but certainly Monday evening. And again, that will give you further links. So I hope you found that useful. I hope you start to make links, whether it be now or in the future, from some of the sections and of individuals and groups who you think it applies to and that we have all seen evidence of over the last 7 to 8 years. And we have many, many more that we could add. That hopefully will put the resentment and the meaning of resentment and the character traits into context. So, look forward to hearing from you all and reading your comments over the next few days. So it's bye from me. Bye from Ivy. Bye.
A las 12 me dan ganas de llamarte por el FaceTime, a decirte que estás bien fine, que me oras como el wine. Conectamos como Wi-Fi, en otra vida como sci-fi. Tu presencia me pone high. Sé que no son horas de llamar, pero es que quiero comerte a besos. Si Dios quiere se nota, a romperte como todos los versos. Esto no es casualidad, de la forma en que tenemos sexo sobrepasa la realidad. Eres lo más chimba de esta, yeah. Se vuelve un caos, bebé, somos el Big Bang. Estoy enchulado, tremendo big plan. Voy pa'l poblado, nos vamos pa' la finca. Y en la cama buscamos brinca, brinca, yeah. Se juntó el hambre, la que me come. Ya tanta lengua sabe de poesía. Es independiente, la bebé no es mía. Pero así se sienta dándonos placer. Y es que cada vez que me suena el cel, muy bien sabemos que hay pa' hacer. Sé que no son horas de llamar, pero es que quiero comerte a besos. Si Dios quiere se nota, pa' romperte como todos los versos. Esto no es casualidad, de la forma en que tenemos sexo sobrepasa la realidad. Eres lo más chimba de verdad, yeah. Bebé, en la cama una free, vamos por ronda como si esto fuera un ring. Empezamos pero no tenemos fin, ya se me peca y lo mueve como Tilín, bebé. Me tira indirecta, siempre sus stories. Está con su cori, pero me tira el cel. Que dónde está la vuelta, manda la shorty. Esa paisita me sube de nivel. Me tira indirecta, siempre sus stories. Está con su cori, pero me tira el cel. Que dónde está la vuelta, manda la shorty. Esa paisita. Sé que no son horas de llamar, pero es que quiero comerte a besos. Si Dios quiere se nota, pa' romperte como todos los versos. Esto no es casualidad, de la forma en que tenemos sexo sobrepasa la realidad. Eres lo más chimba de verdad, yeah. N.I.C.O. Ricky Baker, Poster Boy, papá.